I often clip stories that catch my interest, and I either file them away, use them a day later, or reread them months or years later to see if they're still interesting. And I have to say, I'm dubious about this UFO stuff. I don't need a lot of evidence for that for me. But, I'm recording this. It is December 2022. I'm saying that because a lot of these programs remain on air forever. So, with that said, several days ago, and I've forgotten the state, it was in the Midwest, Wisconsin, I think they saw hundreds of UFO sightings in a 4 hour period one night. Thousands and thousands of people reported this. So, and in different parts of the state, not in just one place. It's interesting. I mean, the Navy has come out and said, well, we don't have a clue what's flying around up there. So, with that said, Apollo 10 was launched by us in May of 1969. And one of its missions was to test the technology that would allow the spacecraft's lunar lander module to detach and then reattach to the command module so they could eventually use it. In fact, they did later that year, I think, to land on the moon. But anyway, while the modules were separated for several hours, the crew began hearing these strange noises. Uh, the sounds were captured in an audio recording, and I'm told that if you want to go look for it, it's online. NASA has released it, and they've released the transcripts along with it of what the astronauts said. I didn't put it here. I just don't have the time to. So this guy Eugene Kiernan, he was head of the program. He asked the guys, "You hear that? You hear that whistling sound?" So his crewmates, Thomas Stanford and John Young, according to the transcript, said, "Boy, that sure is weird music," and they were freaked out. They said, suddenly this eerie noises were coming out of their instruments, and they're in dark space, and hell, I don't blame them. So at the time they were hearing these things, the Apollo 10 spacecraft was on the far side of the moon, out of contact with mission control. They were at the furthest any human had ever been from Earth. And so this odd, high-pitched whining sound, it was stereotypical, as one of the astronauts said, from something like a sound effect from a 1950s science fiction flick, if you've ever seen those. In fact, Kiernan said, that was funny. That's just like something from outer space. Really, who's going to believe it? Nobody, Young answered. Shall we tell him about it? Kiernan replied, I don't know. We ought to think about it some. See, it made sense. The astronauts would play down that phenomenon. Same reason pilots downplayed it. They didn't want to be considered crazy. But in the pilot's case, NASA had really high priorities in keeping astronauts safe, and they were constantly looking at their mental health. There was a lot of pressure. So uh, at the time, astronauts and test pilots typically took a, quote, lie to fly policy towards any crack in their resolve, uh, as any hint of psychological trouble could scrap a mission. It could ground the astronaut forever, get him kicked out of the program. So nobody was in a hurry to say, by the way, we heard music in the middle of outer space. Decades later, for a lot of people, it's still unclear what created those strange sounds. One possible explanation is that the charged particles interfered with radio communications between the two modules, which were separated at the time. Um, Scientists observed that phenomenon when the Cassini spacecraft passed by Saturn. However, Saturn has a ring. It's a ring planet. The moon doesn't have any, and it doesn't have any atmosphere, so that rules out the particles as a source of the noise. Kiernan said recently that it could have been something as simple as radio interference, and NASA immediately backed them up on that, and they said the music was probably nothing more than a whistle created by interference between the VHS radios, one in the command module, one in the lunar valve. So, I guess it's strange, though, isn't it?